we're hoping that can be a great tool to help fathers, begin to focus appropriately in order to turn their situations around.
What about mediation? I know.
Oh, that's a whole other area that we've gone into and continue to do training on. Certainly, mediation is a terrific way of calming. That is actually one of the steps that we're going to be going through. We can talk a little bit about that. We're jumping over a couple of steps here, Dan. One last thing I did want to address, though, in your comment about bringing kids into the fight or the litigation or the he said, she said stuff that goes on. One thing that parents really need to be aware of is, and Danny's quite right, kids aren't stupid. They may not be able to articulate how they're feeling or what they're gleaning from the situation, but kids do eventually grow up. And what we find often is children that have been perhaps brought into the confidence of one parent with the intention of, bad-mouthing the other one, for example, where you, as a child, almost become the parent of your parent. Your mom is confiding in you that your dad's a no good, whatever, or vice versa. Eventually what happens is that child grows up and realizes maybe all that stuff wasn't true, and they also start to realize that they never really had much of a childhood. So often when that occurs, that child, when they do grow up, cuts off all communication with that original parent. So the risks of playing these types of games of trying to gain the confidence of the children or steer them a certain way against the other parent can really backfire. When they grow up, you may lose complete contact with them when they grow up.
I just want to add one comment to that. Is some fathers would characterize that as parental alienation, and I would say that they're making a sad mistake when they're doing that and overplaying their hand. That's not parental alienation. That's parental manipulation. And a lot of fathers sometimes will go into court and claim, this whole parental alienation syndrome that Dr. Gardner put together a while back, without really recognizing that parental alienation is when your child, for example, let's say, is in a supervised access center, and they've got their lawyer, and they've got family, and they've got social workers, and they're cowering in the corner, refusing to have any contact with you. That is alienation. Manipulation is when you let's play confuse a child with parentifying them, taking them into your confidence, and using inappropriate conduct to manipulate the child into taking various positions because the child does not have the level of sophistication that the adult has.
Bottom line, Dan, don't make your children choose between the parents. They love you both. And they deserve to be parented by both mom and dad, and they benefit from that. But let's move on to step 3. I think we've covered communication pretty well here. Step 3 is education. And I'm hoping, as an attorney, you might appreciate some of this. I think a lot of clients, you tell me if I'm wrong, sometimes tell you the way they want it to be. And part of this process is not that you're going to be a lawyer at the end of this. I mean, this is not law school 101, but it's getting a better handle on the process and understanding that, we get a lot of fathers that come in to see us and think, well, I'm just going to go talk to the judge and tell my story. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
There's documents that need to be filed. There's protocol. There's rules and regulations. Unfortunately, it is a lot more complex than I think most people would prefer. But part of that educational process is also understanding what's the best way to work with your attorney, and move forward in a cost-effective and efficient way. And if you're having difficulty with your the emotional stuff that might be going on, to also seek counseling for that. That's not what your attorney's there for. There are, your role as an attorney-client is of a particular role, and then there are other professionals and individuals that can help you through the other aspects of what might be going through as you proceed through separation and divorce. Today we have this wealth of information with the internet, but it goes beyond that. There are audios and CDs that you can listen to. There's podcasts now. As I've mentioned, there's professionals that you can hire and consult with, support groups that are both offline and online. There's self-help resources, lots and lots of books on this topic. So there's no reason that you can't get some of that material and start educating yourself about what your kids are going through, what your relationship, how to best work with your attorney. Oftentimes people don't even think to ask their attorney, what's the best way for me to communicate with you, and so on. And you tell me, as an attorney, would that be a preferred method for you to work with a client?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that helps facilitate, settlement. It helps facilitate communication between you and your spouse, and it furthermore will help with the communication with you and your children.
Absolutely. Danny, let's move on. We'll move on to step 4.
Well, that's negotiation, and I think it's a skill that a lot of people don't really necessarily have. They have maybe several habits that they've developed over the years in order to try and get their way, but I don't think they're necessarily well-defined negotiation skills that have come from any kind of study of the subject. So if your negotiating strategies are limited to 1 or 2 habits, I think that you're going to have a very hard time trying to get to settlement, because negotiation really relies upon the ability to create options. And that only comes about by being able to make fine distinctions and slicing and dicing what's on the table into all kinds of different forms to try and find an effective compromise that people can live with.
There's a really terrific podcast from, is it the Harvard?
The Harvard Negotiation Project.
That's right.
I believe that they're producing a podcast on negotiation.
Yeah, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's one other group that I think a lot of people can learn from when it comes to negotiation, and that's our children. Because, when children want that ice cream cone and they're not getting it, I'll tell you, they come up with all sorts of different angles. And, we don't really think of that in terms of negotiation, but man, oh man, it really is quite powerful, because when you step back and look at the different approaches, be they very basic and very juvenile in terms of what they're trying to, how they're going about it. But it shows you just how many possibilities there are in terms of trying to negotiate something. So I think we can learn from our kids in that respect.
I agree. I don't mean to rush this, but unfortunately we're over the half hour, but I definitely want to get through the next few steps, if you don't mind just kind of briefly touching on them for our audience.
Sure. Well, I'll move on to step 5, which is mediation. And, of course, there are attorneys that do mediation. There's mediators. And, again, this is a great way to bridge the gap between and find those common areas that mom and dad do agree on, and start structuring some sort of ideas on common ground. And then find the areas that need assistance, and sometimes mediators can really help in the conflict resolution. So mediators are a terrific next step.
Step 6 is enrichment, and that's the involvement of a child psychologist who can take a look at where your child is at and where they should be going at based on their developmental needs. For example, if dad has been the piano player in the family and is teaching his daughter how to play piano, and all of a sudden he's not in the home anymore, and mom doesn't play piano, and the kid's not getting piano lessons, well, the child's no longer developing fine motor skills.
Sure.
And, of course, step 7 is probably one that you're quite familiar with, Dan, and that's litigation.